Today, we're going to dive into one of the biggest stories of all, our relationship with what we eat. We're going to uncover how three huge innovations in food didn't just change our dinner plates, they literally built the world we live in today. I know, it sounds like a weird question, right? But seriously, think about what you last ate. That meal is the final chapter in a story that's thousands of years old. Every single bite connects you to a series of revolutions that completely reshaped human history. So let's trace that story all the way back.
So here's the game plan. We'll kick things off with the three big food revolutions. Then we'll see how cooking gave us a massive energy boost. After that, we'll look at how farming created something totally new, a surplus. We'll connect that surplus to the birth of civilization and a brand new problem, spoilage. And finally, we'll see how we solved that problem with preservation.
Our journey from wandering hunter-gatherers to people living in cities is really marked by three giant shifts in how we deal with food. And these weren't just small adjustments, they were fundamental changes that basically rewired human existence. First up was the discovery of cooking. The second was the beginning of agriculture. And the third was the invention of food preservation. Each one solved a huge problem for us, and in doing so, it set the stage for the next big leap forward. All right, let's start with that first absolutely critical step, cooking. See, before we could even think about farms or cities, we had to solve a basic energy crisis. We just needed more fuel for our bodies and our brains, without having to spend every waking moment looking for it. And hey, don't just take my word for it. Charles Darwin himself said that after language, cooking was the single greatest discovery humanity ever made. That is a huge statement, and it's because cooking completely changed our biology.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Cooking does two incredible things. First, it kills off toxins in plants, which suddenly made a whole bunch of new foods safe to eat. But second, and this is the real game changer, it makes food way easier to digest. Heat breaks down all those tough fibers. This means our bodies use a lot less energy chewing and digesting, so we get a much bigger net energy gain. All that extra energy could then fuel everything else, especially bigger brains. So with more energy from cooked food, humanity hit its next big roadblock: time. Hunting and gathering was a full-time job. It took up all your energy. The second great revolution, agriculture, was about to change all of that. Just try to imagine that for a second. Most of your day, every single day, was spent just trying to find your next meal. This constant struggle left almost no time for things like developing new tools, creating art, or building complex communities. This was just how things were for thousands and thousands of years. Then, around 10,500 years ago, things started to shift. Farming wasn't an overnight change, but it slowly remade everything about human society. It's the very system that makes it possible for billions of us to live on Earth today. And agriculture created something the world had never seen before, a concept that is the absolute key to everything that comes next, a food surplus. For the first time ever, we could grow more food than we needed to eat right away. And that changed everything. This new reality of having extra food, of having a surplus, it set off a massive chain reaction. It created these incredible new opportunities for society, but it also created a brand new problem that nobody had ever faced before.
And this shows that chain reaction perfectly. A food surplus means you can finally stop wandering and settle down in one place. And if you're settled and not everyone has to be a farmer, well, people are now free to do other things. This is the birth of specialization. You get soldiers, priests, builders, artists. And when you have all these specialized jobs, you have the birth of a complex society. So really, this specialization is what we call civilization. You need writing to keep track of all that extra grain. You need governments to manage and protect it. People have the time to invent new tools, and with a stable food supply, the population can boom. Pretty much every pillar of modern society rests on that foundation of having extra food stored away. But, of course, there's a catch. Grain gets moldy, meat goes bad. That amazing surplus that you worked so hard for could turn into a useless pile of rot. The very success of farming created a new, urgent problem. And that brings us to our third and final revolution, the brilliant science of food preservation. This was humanity's clever answer to the problem of time and decay. Our ancestors came up with some really smart, low-tech solutions. Smoking, drying, fermenting, salting, they all seem pretty different, but they all work on the exact same principle. They make the food a horrible place for bacteria to grow. Simple, but incredibly effective.
Now, those methods worked for millennia, but then the industrial age brought another huge leap forward: canning. But, let's just say the first versions had a few bugs to work out. The earliest cans were so ridiculously thick, you literally needed a hammer and a chisel to get them open.
The history here is just fascinating. So commercial canning kicks off in 1812, and it worked. A can of meat from 1824 was opened over 100 years later, and it was still perfectly fine to eat. But my favorite fact here, by far, is that the can opener wasn't invented until 1855. That's a full 43 years after the can. For 4 decades, people were just whacking at these things with whatever they could find.
But as good as canning was, in the 20th century, it was mostly overtaken by freezing. The whole modern industry was pretty much started by one guy in the 1920s, Clarence Birdseye. He figured out that if you froze food super fast, it created tiny ice crystals that didn't destroy the food's texture and flavor. This ability to keep food almost exactly like it was when fresh, well, that's why the freezer aisle is so huge today. So there you have it, from the simple act of putting food on a fire, to growing so much food it allowed civilization to happen, to inventing ways to make that food last. These 3 revolutions took thousands of years to unfold. And it kind of leaves you with one big question. In our world, with all its challenges, what's our next great food revolution going to be?